Hello and welcome to Game Changer. I'm Maryam Zia. Today we will be discussing about the critical issue of climate change and of course the urgent need for a strong and coordinated climate change finance ecosystem. When we talk about Pakistan, Pakistan is ranked of course at Pakistan is the fifth most vulnerable country in the world when we talk about climate. And experts warn that until 2050, Pakistan needs an annual investment of $40 to $50 billion just to adapt and build resilience. Pakistan requested at least and over $1 billion, 1.2 around billion dollar back in October 2024 for building resilience from IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust. And we know that IMF's mission is visiting Pakistan from 24th to 28th February to further discuss and of course to further discuss about this trust. In today's program we will be talking about all these dimensions. The IMF has also recommended that Pakistan at least invest 1% of its GDP, that is over 1.24 trillion rupees each year into climate resilience and adaptation efforts and reforms. In today's program, we will be talking about how to go about it, the climate change and of course its impact on Pakistan's economy and human factor of it, and also how to build that of course climate change ecosystem, climate change finance ecosystem. To discuss this and more, we are joined in the studios by Mr. Waqar Sherazi, who is a climate change expert. Welcome to the program. And we are joined online by economist Dr. Hassan Zafar. Welcome to the program. Mr. Waqar Sherazi, let me start with you. Of course, when we look at the reports, of course, they are concerning, keeping in mind that Pakistan contributes less than 1% to carbon emissions, global carbon emissions. And when we talk about the impacts, Pakistan is fifth most vulnerable country. And also when we talk about the global warming, Pakistan is above the global average. Of course, when we look at the reports, this suggests to go about the adaptation measures. In your opinion, at this point in time, what kind of long-term adaptation measures Pakistan need?
Well, to start with, you're quite right that Pakistan produces less than 1% of the total carbon emissions around the globe. That is precisely the 0.6%. But on the juncture of facing the climate-induced calamities and the impacts, adverse impacts of the climate change, Pakistan is in the top line to face the climate-induced calamities. But with regards to adaptation, as you have mentioned, that being a producer of less than 1% of the carbon footprints, there is a climate cost of the development, the international development. The economic growth contributes into the climate, into the greenhouse gas emissions, which is the basic cause of the climate change. And Pakistan, since being a underdeveloped country and being a developing country, contributes less than 1% of the total carbon emission around the globe. In this regard, the climate adaptation requires finance. And with regards to finance, Pakistan lacks in terms of overall allocation towards climate adaptation. In this regard, we definitely will have to look towards the international community to move forward and work hand in glove with Pakistan to provide us with the basic resources which are required to embed the climate adaptation into our policies and into the instruments which are required to plead with this climate adaptation, mitigation and response.
Right, and talking about of course and going forward with these international funds that are available, there are a lot of bottlenecks as well. We will be talking about those. But Dr. Hassan, when we talk about IMF's suggestion and recommendation that Pakistan needs to invest 1% of its GDP, that is over 1.24 trillion rupees annually in climate resilience. In your opinion, what sectors should be given priority when we talk about this?
Thank you very much, Maryam, for your question. This demand of the IMF that Pakistan should be spending 1% of its GDP is quite unfair in the first place. We are not contributing as much to the environmental damage as we are being asked to contribute. But it makes sense because we have just experienced that the American administration, they have pulled out of the Paris Agreement, so they are not giving any money to the international agencies. Europe is facing its own problems. So, in this kind of changed world, I'm not saying changing, I'm saying changed world, we are left on our own. And uh, on the one hand, $1.2 billion from the IMF uh, in the area of environmental improvement, that is a welcome thing. But on the other hand, what they are demanding that we permanently dedicate 1% of our GDP to the environmental issue. Well, it is our issue, but how this should be managed, that remains to be seen because the allocation of funds we'll have to pull out. We are already quite strained when it comes to the finances. So in that case, we will have to pull this money out from some key sectors where we are already hard pressed. Where should we get this money from? So that remains a challenge after this demand.
Right, right. And talking about that money, we know that IMF delegation is visiting from today, that is 24th of February till 28th, to discuss about this IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Trust. What outcomes are you expecting, especially when we talk about it in regards to building climate resilience?
Well, for the first advantage could be, if we look at the positive side of it, one, it could be policy reforms. Two, it could contribute to the economic stability. And then it also shows some kind of international confidence in what Pakistan is doing. And if you like to give some credit to the present government, I think that that's fair too, because this shows that the IMF or the international agencies, international community is showing some confidence in the current policies. And it will also definitely have some social impact because the local markets, when the IMF money comes into our system, the local market feels more confident that yes, the government is going in the right direction, the policies are okay. So that has a larger impact in the local markets too. And of course, then if this money is spent on the key environmental challenges, there will be environmental benefits if we utilize it smartly. But we will have to see how to utilize it smartly. We need to build small water reservoirs so the underground water level can come up with the kind of a problem you are facing in Islamabad and Rawalpindi these days. So that is a problem. So these are the main challenges: clean air and clean water, clean drinking water and water for irrigation. We get, Mariam, the Indus water system gives us 145 million acre feet of water. Our total irrigated land is the land that we irrigate through this system, through the canals and other things. That's about 18% of 18 million hectares. So that means that we are not even utilizing 20% of that water. So where is that water going? It is going into the sea, or worst come worst, we face floods. And we also saw this Atabag lake coming up a decade ago. That was the environmental disaster. So we are not building dams, we are not preserving water, and that water is being wasted. And it also causes huge damages. Remember the amount of damage that was done due to the floods 10 years ago? We are still recovering from that. people are still trying to find shelters. So that's the kind of environmental challenge we are facing at the moment. So this money, the inflow of the money, the size of the money is one thing, but the inflow of this kind of money shows some international confidence in the policies. I look at that from that angle.
Right. But still, there needs to be work done from institutions as well. To talk more about it, we are joined in this by Dr. Jasim Anwar, who is development expert. Welcome to the program, Dr. Jasim. Since we are discussing about climate change and, of course, the urgent need of a coordinated and strong climate change finance ecosystem. We know that when we talk about our climate policy architecture, it dates back to 1983. But still, there are gaps when we look at the infrastructure. What kind of policy shifts are needed at this point in time? And also, what institutional gaps have hindered this progress?
All right, thank you so much. Well, there are two angles that you want me to highlight. One is the gaps and the institutional reforms focusing on the climatic financing and a climatic resilient, sustainable ecosystem in this country. And you also mentioned it's dated back to 1982. So number one, we need to understand the implication of the climatic financing and its recognition across various developed and developing countries, both. I'll talk more on the major contributor of the carbon footprint in the global ecosystem. So they are mostly developed countries, as you're aware of those that are more on fossil fuel as a major source of energy. That includes China and US, Canada, and many other developing nations. And for the same reason, the COP29, the Paris Accord, and a number of other environmental sustainability initiatives at the global level are taken. And the carbon credit concept emerged. Before that, the role of the national government, like Pakistan, and its emphasis on the climatic financing and the climatic resilient ecosystems were not that much integrated across all policies. Why I'm saying all policies, that covers not only human capital development, but also infrastructure development, also education, health, behavior change, and ABCD, you name any policy. That concept was not much integrated in a way that it should be. So the need is a coherent, cohesive policy dimensions covering the climatic financing at all levels, right from the national level up to the divisional level or even sub-district level. So that's the concept that we were missing. Another one is advocating the need of the international development assistance in the areas where needed the most. You know, the framework of Planning Commission of Pakistan, the 5E, also one of the E is equity-based approach, which also addresses to areas that are more vulnerable to the climatic effects, like, you know, the rain draft areas, the flood affected areas, and the areas that are more likely to be suffering the unexpected rainfalls. So that focus needs to be highlighted across the national and international forums and in all our development policies. So hopefully with these integrated approach, we'll be able to, you know, cope up with this in next few decades. The effects are not likely to be delivered immediately because the climatic change emerges over decades. And even the reforms, the process that we address also takes time.
Of course, that is a time-taking process, but at the same time, like Dr. Jasim alluded to, the new tools that are being used, like we know about the climate policy assessment tool, are now crucial in quantifying the impact of these mitigation policies. So, Mr. Waqar, in your opinion, how can Pakistan effectively utilize such tools to effectively advocate for international funding?
Yeah. Pakistan is going to prepare its 13th Economic Development Plan this year, in year 2025. and the third nationally determined contributions document this year again. Uh, there was a gap between the economic development plans and the different policies prepared by the provincial ministries and even by the federal ministries after 2013, because the centrality of the economic development plan was lost after 2013. After 18th Amendment, I would certainly indicate. This time, the IMF delegation would work with different ministries, like Ministry of Planning, like Ministry of Climate Change, Ministry of Finance itself, and many other ministries to look how these strategies can be adopted by different policy documents which did not adopt them previously. After 2013, Pakistan prepared almost 60 sectoral policy documents in different ministries, and it was observed that these benchmarks were not included in those sectoral policy documents. So IMF
So there is
delegation
a
would
need
be
for a lot of coordination amongst the planning ministry and of course about the provinces when we talk about specifically climate change, because when we
Certainly.
look at the climate financing, provinces usually go for bilateral funding options, while when we look at the center, center usually opts for, of course, multilateral options or banks as well. So how do you think that we should be better organizing or coordinating?
I think that it is obvious that there is a communication gap between the federation, between the federal agencies and the provincial departments itself, which is very visible here in Pakistan. We'll have to focus on that. And with regards to that, we'll have to prepare a joint working group along with the international community to better understand the demand for the Pakistan's pledges for the international climate change and its resilience. And with regards to the Pakistan action on climate, as my colleagues mentioned, that we are certainly looking towards the finance, which comes from the international donors. But on the one hand, we are emphasized by the international community to allocate at least 1% of our GDP, which is now more than rupees 1.24 trillion, and which will increase in the future in terms of amount, not in terms of percentage. But on the other hand, we observe an ironic trend by the international community, as America, being the largest producer of the carbon or the greenhouse gas emissions,
Has backed off from
has pulled it out
Yes.
from the Paris Agreement. So I think that this duality will have to end, and international community will have to understand their role in terms of providing finance to the developed countries, developing countries, to better perform in terms of achieving the overall climate change targets and its benchmarks.
Right, right. And Dr. Hassan, what's your take on this, keeping in mind the geopolitical dynamics that are shifting each day, and especially when we look at the past 30 years, global funds like GCF, GEF and Adaptation Fund have disbursed over $22 billion worldwide, while Pakistan got around $1 billion in last 30 years. So do you think Pakistan needs to better its strategies when going for these funds? And what's the role of geopolitics in all this?
Maryam, frankly speaking, I am even surprised that IMF, which is of course backed by the United States, has given $1.2 billion to Pakistan in an environment where these big powers that are contributing massively to the environmental damage, the, they are not really interested in this kind of project. And the proof is that it was just days ago when the US aid was shut down, and the aid that was coming through US aid to Pakistan for last several years, let me say several decades, has been stopped, and that aid was being spent in the environmental areas alongside alongside other plans. So that is the situation. So what we need to do, that remains a question. Let me give you a list of the policies that Pakistan has made in last 20 years. One was National Climate Change Policy, that was 2012. It was updated in 2021. Then we have Pakistan's nationally determined contributions, NDCs, that is the Paris Agreement. And then we have Pakistan Environmental Protection Act, PEPA, 1997. And then we have a National Forest Policy 2015, Renewable Energy Policy 2019, National Electric Vehicles Policy 2019, 10 billion tree program, etc. But what needs to be done in this geopolitical environment, which you indicated, all these environmental policies, all these laws and acts and whatnot, they need to be updated. That is required, because the kind of geopolitical changes we have witnessed in the previous few months, or maybe last few weeks, that's the problem we are facing right now, because we'll have to update ourselves. We'll have to find ways of generating funds to fight this menace. That's the situation we have.
Right, right. While, of course, we have shifting geopolitical environment, especially after Trump 2.0 in the office, in the White House. But Dr. Jasim, at the same time, we know for a fact that 2022 floods highlighted our own vulnerabilities and, of course, weaknesses or gaps in infrastructure. What changes or what development reforms, especially when we talk about urban infrastructure, are needed to reduce vulnerability in our cities and in our vulnerable communities, rather?
Well, you know, I would like to connect your this question with my colleague referring to 13th Amendment and Dr. Hassan Saab on alignment of the various strategies. So number one, you need to understand that the 13th Amendment and the devolution of powers does not mean that we are making separate countries. That has to be regulated, supported and financed, whereas the objective was to improve the governance and the delivery of certain actions. When you come into that, the alignment of the national priorities and the national vision should come up with the provincial policies and provincial strategies all in one line. Unless this alignment is achieved in a holistic and cohesive and inclusive way, we may suffer such calamities also in future. Why? You have to see to the contributors of the flood first. Is it deforestation? Either it is, you know, the what you called the lack of the initiatives that encourages the desalination of the lands, or it is the water to soil absorption capacity in urban structures. Now, your third point was urbanization actually. So the urbanization is governed under certain rules, which means that this has to be cemented place, whereas to be a specified number of the mud area that should have the water absorption capacity. We have seen in E11 few years ago, you know, the flooding, the flash flood. That shouldn't be, you know, there. Why? Because there was a more cemented ratio than that it should be. All these then come up with the holistic approach of reflecting carbon emission and environment resilient at the ground root level. I'll give you one example. Is there any national policy for health that actually speaks of the net zero carbon emission hospitals? Is there any provincial strategy to develop or transform entire education infrastructure into a net zero carbon emission as a symbolic support? That question needs to be addressed by balancing our energy needs. You know, we need to understand what is our major carbon emission sectors. So I think it's energy, number one, is coal and fossil fuel. They're the biggest contributors. And the hydropower is only making 25% of the energy in Pakistan. Solarization only 1 to 2% in Pakistan.
Right.
So see, this all links with overall carbon emission. Now when you talk of the flooding effect, this is not only one province that suffers from it. I will say that it's the contribution of all the developing nations that actually shift the climate globally. It has to do with the sea current, water levels. It has to do with the, the abrupt rain patterns, the drought, and all those interrelated environment phenomena that comes to us. Whereas that is why it's more of the international issue than the national issue.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course, but at the same time, we are the one who are suffering. But when we talk about reaching out or utilizing those international funding that are available to maybe other countries, don't you think that we are not advocating for ourselves because of the lack of, as you alluded to, streamlining of our policies? Because when we look at the national and provincial roles in accessing these international climate funding opportunities, we miss a lot of opportunities. So what needs to be done to streamline those policies and gaps?
That is number one is, be receptive, be adaptive to the local energy needs and local climatic resilient infrastructures and climatic financing, locally designed and locally inclusive and locally adaptive. That's number one thing. While you mentioned that, such international development forums, you clearly mentioned the Trump 2.0 and its evacuation from the Paris Accord is a clear indication, and the highest number of coals and is in China. It's evident, and the thermal power is also there in all those developing countries. So for us, the development focus normally comes from those US aid driven projects, or for that matter EU and other development cooperations, either it's multilateral or bilateral cooperations. The volume is so less that countries like us, Pakistan and many other developing countries who are suffering because of that, needs to be advocated by some forums such as United Nations, or for that matter our own national assemblies and at the media level as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Please go ahead.
So that is an ongoing debate, and we need to bring these into all development policies through whole of the government approach, not only in just a climatic department approach or climatic ministry policy. It has to be across the board at out level. All policies should be coherent for climatic resilience and climatic financing. Yes.
Right. And Mr. Waqar, when we look at 2022 floods, of course, the losses Pakistan suffered exceeded $30 billion. That was far exceeding the amounts that were dispersed by UNFCCC. And what lessons can we learn? Like, I keep on repeating the question that what lessons can we learn to develop a more robust ecosystem?
I think learning the lesson is the primary question, and we should time and again ask this question from ourselves, because on one hand, we have been constantly asking to the IMF, to the climate mitigation and response and the loss and damages funds and the aid from the international communities, but on the other hand, with small adaptations at governance level, we can do better with regards to climate vulnerabilities and climate infrastructure in Pakistan, and adaptation as well. As we have mentioned earlier, that how much of the energy produced in Pakistan is green energy is our indigenous problem. Are we focusing on to the renewable energy like solar panels and the wind energy? The answer is the required amount of attention is not paid yet to this sector. On the other hand, we are enhancing our population with a massive and I would say an exponential level. We are amongst the countries with the highest growth, annual population growth rate amongst throughout the world.
And we're not using that human capital positively.
Not only the human capital positively, but the growing population has a carbon footprint itself. More people means more requirement of clean drinking water, more requirement of clean water, more requirement of resources, more requirement of health, education, infrastructure, and rest of the things. So as we know that the climate-induced calamities affect in the front line the vulnerable communities like the poor and the other vulnerable sectors of the society. So by enhancing with the population, by enhancing population, we are growing more segment of the society with vulnerable, we are contributing more in vulnerabilities of the societies. So vulnerable groups are more prone to get affected by the climate-induced calamities. In this regard, as I have mentioned previously, that with small adaptations, like focusing on the policies with regards to planning, with regards to all of the ministries, with regards to especially the population growth itself, with regards to infrastructure, with regards to clean and green energy, with regards to awareness amongst the masses, we can contribute much with the support of minimum financial resources. On the other hand, we should also focus on diversifying our financial resources, not focusing only on the IMF and the World Bank, but we'll have to diversify our financial resources to better cope up with the challenges emerged by the climate change.
Of course, indeed, diversifying those as well remains an important aspect. But Dr. Hassan, coming back to the point that we discussed earlier, that climate-related disasters have slowed down our developmental gains and of course has impacted our economy as well. So what kind of measures in regards to adaptation are required when we look at different sectors for our economic recovery and long-term growth?
Yes, first of all, the environmental issues Pakistan is facing is not just one type, it's different. For example, in the Punjab, it is different. In Sindh, it is different. We get less flooding in the central and the northern part of Punjab. That is the major concern of the south of Punjab and Sindh. So, but on the other hand, we get air pollution from India during the months of October and November in the eastern part of the Punjab. That happens every year. It's been going on for last several years now. Uh, there have been talks from the Punjab government of taking it up with the Indian Punjab government. So that is a positive thing. But are the Indians really ready to address this problem? Are they really ready to reduce their carbon emissions? I doubt it, because that's another game. They, all these nations in our neighborhood, all over the world, they are in a trade war right now, and they will be very reluctant, unwilling to reduce their carbon emissions. That will raise their cost of production. So I don't see that happening. So what is the way out? We have to increase our forest cover area that can combat this air pollution issue, because air pollution is not just a health issue. It causes health problems, and it is heavy on our health bill, national health bill, that is seriously affected by this air pollution. Then there, as I discussed earlier, there have been several laws, there have been several policies, but the implementation of those policies and laws, that is a serious problem. For example, few years ago, there was the Punjab government imposed a ban on the use of plastic bags. Those plastic bag makers go to the High Court, take a stay. Those plastic bags are still there. How are we disposing of all that? How solid waste management is a problem. So, but if you look at the number of laws, we have several laws, but not being implemented. That remains the key issue here. You talk about anything or any issue that we are facing, we have laws, we have agencies, we have government departments,
Implementation
but
remains a question. Yeah.
nothing that is not functioning very well. That remains the main challenge here.
Right, that remains a main challenge. And Dr. Jasim, when we look at Pakistan's nationally determined contributions, they are very ambitious. But of course, when we look at those, do you think that it needs contribution from private sector as well? And if so, what kind of incentives can be given to private sector, especially businesses, so that they can help in building climate resilience?
Well, I would refer back to 5E framework and 13th 5 years plan, the next 13th 5-year plan, which the starting punchline that I've read somewhere is, government should reduce its footprint, improve regulations and governance, and encourage private sectors for, holistic development approach. So, coming to the private sector, its contributions I will divide into two things. Number one is its contribution in the energy generation, clean energy generation, and second is its contribution in any industry linked with the carbon footprint. In terms of energy generation, we do have some IPPs in Pakistan which are also working in a solar sector, and that needs to be encouraged and broadening its base across Pakistan. Another aspect of climatic resilience and the aspect of environment is diversification of the clean energy resources. Like we have in some places wind power.
Yes.
And in some places we also need to bring in more biogas and also more solar plants in a more distributed way. It's called the decentralized distributed hubbing systems for efficient energy delivery. So that's one aspect that can majorly contribute to or climatic resilient. Another one is your consumer side. Those who are consuming the either hydro or thermal power, you link it with the private sector, either in terms of improving its efficiency of revenue collection or distribution. So once these two are linked, you are indirectly reducing the carbon footprint at the consumer level.
And they should be directly reporting to the government or the relevant stakeholders.
Relevant stakeholder can be involved in the process. And another one is your production sector. So, the tariff, internationally we have seen that the number of developing countries who encourage the environment resilient framework are those who are giving some subsidies to those who are actually using the clean and green energy with subsidies in terms of either tax rebates or some tariff rebates, but linked them with the output, not only for granted. Rather, for example, export-oriented business is being done, and there is an evidence by company. You can always, give some tariff relief to that company.
A proper monitoring system or reporting system of the businesses or the private sector.
Yes, and for that matter, the authorities are now in function. For example, P3A, Public-Private Partnership Authority is in place, and the framework and Udan Pakistan also giving indication in that direction that we need to work on export-led economy with human capital building and environment resilience as well, apart from other two E's. So it's all in line now. It's all the matter of capitalizing on it and implementing it in the right way.
Right, of course, it is going in the right direction. That is some positive sentiment coming from Dr. Jasim. But how can we effectively engage other groups like academia? Because awareness remains an important aspect when we talk about building climate change, when we talk about climate change and building climate resilience systems and opting for climate financing.
2 or 3 weeks back, there was a conference in Islamabad organized by a private media group on the subject of climate.
Yes.
And to my knowledge, it was the first conference by any private media group. So with regards to the corporate social responsibility, I think that it is not only about the media, but it is in terms of the business community itself, as my colleague mentioned, that not only that we are not aware of our responsibilities, but even if we are aware of some of the responsibilities, we are not ready to pay back to the society. In Pakistan, it was shared that only 4% of the population is aware of the problem of climate change, which reflects on the inability of the media itself, that how it has failed to communicate the severity of the problem to the common masses who can contribute in climate change,
Also
or who
the
can
academia,
Yes,
it also
yes. I'm
includes
coming to
youth
them as well.
empowerment. Yeah.
And it also shows that how it has being unable to motivate those people who can work as an agent of stopping the climate or adverse effect of climate change. With regards to academia, you have seen that how many of the researches and the research papers are there on the climate change in Pakistan with regards to the indigenous problems and with regards to the indigenous habits and emissions and the productions we are making in Pakistan. With this regard, I think that there is a gap in the overall society of not only understanding the severity of the problem, but to adopt and in terms of adopting their role, but not only in terms of adopting their role, but just to accepting that there is a problem of climate change in Pakistan. So we'll all have to come together and become forward, a step forward, rather than blaming only the international community, because we have understood that there is an international hypocrisy. On one hand, Germany is saying that by the year 2030, there would be a zero carbon footprint with regards to the fossil fuel consumption, with regards to the vehicles. But for the lithium-induced batteries of these vehicles, the amount, 70% of the water of the Chile would be consumed for this lithium process. It means that the zero carbon footprint emission cost of one country would be paid by another country. So having said that,
so there is still a gap and of course a bias when we talk about global north and global south.
Global south. So we'll have to understand that the international commitment on the climate change towards the third world country is near to zero. We'll have to understand, we'll have to adopt at our own, with our own strategies, and to bridge the gap between the policies and implementation, as you have previously mentioned. Because I think that enough has been done with regards to policy. We understand the phenomena. It is the implementation, it is the capacity building, and it is the intention.
And of course, it is the right of every citizen and the basic right of every citizen to have clean air to breathe. Thank you very much, Mr. Waqar Sherazi, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Jasim Anwar, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan Zafar, for joining us in today's program. That's all from today's discussion. Thank you for joining.